Most of the people I work with have never been in therapy. My work is a little bit different from like meeting with a therapist in the community. You're not like sitting on a couch for 45 minutes and, we're talking about, we usually are very focused on the present moment and how to um, emotionally process what's going on, if the person's ready. A lot of times it's just sitting with people. So we are with people in the infusion suite when they're getting their treatment.
Welcome, everybody, to our next episode of the Multiple Myeloma Patient Connect podcast. Today, we have a real treat. First of its kind, we are speaking with a social worker in the multiple myeloma space at Dana-Farber Hospital. And before I introduce Adam Lang, our guest, I will say a little bit about what is Patient Connect, and then I'll let Adam introduce himself. So Patient Connect, as you may or may not know, is a map that helps people connect with other people who can help them get better support and care, specifically for patients, to find other patients, specialists, support groups, and more. So you can put your story up on the map as a pin. You can direct message other folks. You can find specialists. You can connect with multiple myeloma specialist hospitals like Dana-Farber. And we just make it super easy to find people in intuitive ways. So with that, click on the link above. And now I'll hand it over to Adam. Adam, you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you so much for having me. I'm really thrilled to be here. Yeah, as you mentioned, I work in the Multiple Myeloma Center at Dana-Farber. So that's primarily the patient population that I work with. I also do see some people with lymphomas and other rare blood disorders, but really primarily it's multiple myeloma. And I've been at Dana-Farber for just over 5 years altogether. And I love my job. It's a real privilege, I always say, to be able to hold space with patients in their treatment experience and be part of their care, and to bring kind of a holistic perspective to their oncology treatment. Which I'm happy to elaborate a little bit more later about what that means. But yeah, I'm an open book, so happy to.
Definitely. And so yeah, we want to understand that role, you know, as a social worker. How do you support the MM patients in their journey? What's your day-to-day look like? Let's get into that a little bit.
Every day is really different. So because there are so many uh, variations of multiple myeloma and so many different types of treatments, really see kind of the whole spectrum of like where people are at in treatment. So we're with patients in the moment at new diagnosis. We often get
Mhm.
referrals when someone's at the very beginning. We will also get people who maybe they've just had disease progression and they're starting a new therapy. We get patients who are doing immunotherapies or transplant therapies, and that subset of patients is actually required to meet with a social worker for their insurance approval, because the research tends to show that they have overall a better outcome when they've also met with a social worker. Just knowing, we all know some of those moving parts involved in a transplant or CAR T treatment, for example. Um, but really, I often will tell my patients that most of the people I work with have never been in therapy. My work is a little bit different from like meeting with a therapist in the community. You're not like sitting on a couch for 45 minutes and we're talking about, we usually are very focused on the present moment and how to um, emotionally process what's going on, if the person's ready. A lot of times it's just sitting with people. So we are with people in the infusion suite when they're getting their treatment. Sometimes we get on the phone or telehealth with patients. We've had a big expansion in those services since the COVID-19 pandemic in 2020. And we really, so our work with patients is a wide spectrum of of interventions. And my motto is, and common among many social workers, is to really meet the person where they're at. Meaning I sort of interview the patient much the same way as you're interviewing me right now, to really have a conversation about who this person is in the whole context of their life. Who were they before the multiple myeloma? What got you up in the morning? What are your resources and strengths? So I take a really strengths-based approach, and I really normalize the wide range of feelings that someone might encounter when they're diagnosed or when they relapse, or maybe if they're anticipating an MRI, that it's very typical to have a range of anxiety, mood swings. These are things I tend not to pathologize, but
Right.
I am also a resource for mental health, and I can help someone decide what's maybe a useful part of their coping strategy.
Got it. That makes sense. So you mentioned earlier about holistic care and sort of like patient centricity. So, what are some of the biggest emotional or practical challenges that these patients face, and how do you help them navigate those issues?
Yeah, they're numerous. I I have to say one of the more common ones is financial. A lot of people, they're getting this diagnosis like mid-career or a few years before their anticipated retirement, right? So like, and we're getting more and more young adults too. So, and people are living longer. There's a lot more questions these days about like how do we manage multiple myeloma as a disability, as a chronic illness, sometimes remaining in the workplace or sometimes adjusting financially to being out of work. So finances are high up there. And I lead with that because it's just that affects everything, right? Um, Also high up there though is just the emotional experience, right? Like what does it feel like to be going through all of those things? And like how do we come up with language to start talking about that when the person's ready? And people have different coping styles. Some people really like to compartmentalize. They don't like to talk about it a whole lot. So I don't push when that's the case. Sometimes I'm just sitting with someone and like, okay, let's talk about your fitness plan. Let's be really nuts and bolts and strategic. So with a lot of people, we're just, where it's like coaching, kind of coaching through stress management techniques. Some people want to process more emotionally and just want to tell their story. And that's fine too. I think a problem a lot of people run into when they get this diagnosis is like, who am I now? That's okay. Before this, I was a triathlete, and I did everything right. And how come I got this cancer? So, like, finding language to sit with the unexplainable, with the uncertainty. The Another one I'll put out there is a kind of I think a lot of people throw this term around, waiting for the other shoe to drop, fear of relapse, and being in surveillance. So I often find, like, paradoxically, the better people are doing physically, the harder it can get mentally. Like when you're going through like early treatment or transplant, you kind of just you're going through it and you're not really necessarily thinking about it or talking about it a whole lot. But the time often comes, maybe a few months later, where I may just get a call from someone and like they're kind of we've met and they're ready to maybe talk a little more. So, everyone's different. There's no right or wrong way to, you know, to hold it, but I will say those are like my general observations.
I think that makes a lot of sense. Maybe you can say a little bit about how at Dana-Farber specifically, how working with the medical team there, how, folks are getting the comprehensive care and also like specific resources and programs, partnerships that Dana-Farber does, maybe that are different than other places that you can highlight.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I'm really fortunate that we're a very resource-rich institute. Like, and yet we still run into lots and lots of gaps in care. But we're a very interdisciplinary team. We have a lot of other specialties that we work side by side with. So it's a physician-led team. So there's always, the primary oncologist who's holding the center. They're often working with the patient's primary care physician and sharing notes. And I always say the better connected they are, the primary oncologist and the primary care doctor, the better. So we also are in tandem with agencies and clinics outside of Dana-Farber too. But within Dana-Farber, we also have nutrition services, which becomes very important. I highly recommend meeting with a nutritionist, especially if you're doing transplant or an immunotherapy. We work with psychiatry sometimes if someone benefits from a medication that just helps with their nerves or helps with their mood while they're going through treatment. Someone who also kind of knows the oncology piece too. We work with the Zakim Center for Integrative Therapies, and that's a program that offers things more kind of in like the mind-body medicine space, like meditation. We also have a lot of wonderful complementary therapies like Tai Chi, acupuncture, massage therapy. There's a lot of research that shows it's very, very beneficial to our mental health and physical health. We also have community connection programs. So we have the Blum Patient and Family Resource Center, which has a huge library that, patients can kind of educate themselves with. And then outside of Dana-Farber, there's a really growing ecosystem of community-led efforts, such as your own. And I'm really excited about the role artificial intelligence might play just in, the more web-based and app-based these spaces become. Health Tree is a wonderful organization. If you haven't worked with them yet, they offer one-on-one peer-to-peer myeloma coaching. So that means you can meet with someone over the phone who's dealing with something similar as you are, and kind of have like a more informal like friendship and coaching. And then, the International Myeloma Foundation, myeloma.org, does wonderful work, support groups, Leukemia and Lymphoma Society, big shout out to them. They have wonderful grants that I think for a lot of our patients are the difference between keeping up with their bills and staying out of debt and not. And they have a bunch of other resources as well. So it's multivaried. I'm a small part of helping people connect with those.
That makes sense. Thank you. And so when you think about like gaps in care and what we can do better, as a community, what sort of, um, resources do you feel the need, to be addressed for patients better?
Yeah, yeah. Great question. We're often seeing those in real time, some of those gaps, and that's often why people get sent to me is when there is a gap. Prescription drug coverage, like no surprise. I think a lot of people struggle. Fortunately, a lot of times drug companies do have grants to assist with like the Revlimid grant, for instance. And we all know that that is a notoriously expensive drug. I think outside of like prescriptions and healthcare costs, a big issue is changes in work or how disability status affects one's ability to work. Um, for many people, going from their regular income to, short and long-term disability insurance and in some instances, Social Security, there's a big change in income. It was never part of the financial plan to get multiple myeloma, right? And so a lot of people find it's just not enough. So I tend to think any policy that is beneficial for people with disabilities, like Social Security, the Americans with Disabilities Act, will help people with multiple myeloma, because it can provide for maybe getting some accommodations at work so you can keep working and keep getting your check, or better access to Social Security. And then another thing I'll say too is another gap that's very apparent in Boston and many parts of the country is that multiple myeloma is a disease that disproportionately affects Black Americans. And yet, the amount of Black Americans that have access to a specialty cancer center like Dana-Farber, or getting immunotherapies or clinical trial access, doesn't reflect that. And that's not acceptable. So I think where we need to be putting a lot of our efforts is closing that gap, and also making mental health services available, because there are similar trends in mental health that kind of disproportionate access to services. So I think that's something that in oncology and in mental health we need to work on. So yeah, gaps. I mean, there are many, but I am optimistic that, I think there's such a strong community, and multiple myeloma is a very special kind of uh, community, because people sort of have to really educate themselves about it, because it's a chronic illness, and people have to really look out for the long haul. And I find people are more likely in that case to look for friends
Right.
and
Right.
networks.
Exactly. I mean, that's why we created the Patient Connect map for creation of more friends and network. And so we're very excited for people to continue to join. Quick plug, we have over 8,000 people in the broader community, over 1,000 people on the map. Everybody's telling their stories, and we're getting dozens and dozens of people signing up every day. So, please join the network. Adam, shifting gears, you also are a support group leader. So maybe you can, shed some insight on your leadership there, and, how this group came to be, what's been the response from participants, how you work with other support group leaders, so on and so forth.
Yeah, so that's one of my favorite parts of this job, is working with our group, and I had really big shoes to fill. This is a support group that's been around for almost 15 years, I think, and I've only been involved just this past year. And the group has really grown into like such a just formidable presence. We've grown so much that kind of when I jumped on board a year ago, we changed the format a bit, so that instead of being one big virtual group, we for our patient group, we break out into two breakout rooms now, because there's just so many people who are kind of joining in to the conversation. It is a virtual group. We've been virtual since the pandemic, and I think we're going to keep it that way for the foreseeable future. It's expanded our outreach. I think it allows more people to connect with us without having to go into Boston, at the expense of some of that in-person community. And one of our hopes as co-facilitators, my colleague and I, we would love to have some kind of, I don't know, in-person gathering at some point. But that's been a compromise. But one of the things that's been really lovely about the group is we're able to have a guest speaker every month, kind of like what you do in the podcast. So we're reaching out to people to plan 2025, and who's going to speak with our group then. And I always learn something, and I often learn from my patients too. I really, I'm able to really take a back seat with this group, because they're so supportive of one another and knowledgeable as a group, that it makes my job very easy, and it teaches me a lot.
That's fantastic. Let's see here. So when you think about the virtual versus in person and the themes that get brought up in the various formats, maybe you can, for those that aren't part of a support group already, maybe you can give them some view into why they should be joining a support group, either in person or virtual, or what they have access to anywhere in the country or the world. Um, any thoughts around that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I always do a screening call with our group to sort of tell people what the experience is like, and kind of leave it to them to decide if that's something they think might help or not. But my pitch for it is generally that there's power in numbers. There's something irreplaceable about the we're all in the same boat feeling. It really can normalize your experience to hear someone else be like, oh, this sort of thing keeps me up at night. Oh, you too. Okay. Or the neuropathy, like, oh, it's just I can't get over it, you know. Yeah, oh, me too. So there's a lot of, I think, power in that. It can be a very self-empowering experience. Um, I often hear, one of the maybe side effects of being in a group is that it can just feel like too much, like too much to like hear people's stories. And I think it's, people know their own limits with like what they're ready for and what they're ready to talk about. So um it may not always be the right time to be in a group. And I fully give, I try to give people permission to opt out if they just don't feel it's the right time to, to open up. I also say that listening is more than enough. If you wanted to show up and listen, that can be healing. And that it can be so normalizing just to take some of the stigma and taboo away from having some anxiety about what's going on, right? Or like having worries that you're talking to a group about. So I would say that's my usual pitch for it.
Love that. Love that. So when you think back on sort of personal experiences and reflections, are there any particular patient stories that have inspired you or sort of shaped your approach to supporting myeloma patients?
Yeah, every day. I mean, I'm always adjusting my my methods or just my way of doing the work. And I try to, tell myself that I I really in the grand scheme of things, there's a lot I don't know. And most of what I do know are things I've learned from my patients. So I'm often really impressed by people's strengths and where they find their strengths because they're different places from where I find my own strengths usually because we're all different in that respect. Um, and that for me, I mean, it's inspired like new hobbies for me when I hear, oh, this is what I do to kind of stay out of my head. And I sometimes I think for myself, like, oh, that's a good idea. And just and I think knowing that where what I often see in people is like people are usually stronger than they think. Or kind of when they come out of something like stem cell transplant and they're like, wow, I can't believe I did that. Um, I don't know if I do it again, but I can't believe I did it. And just being really like, I think having a sense of wonderment at where people get their strength from, is really, I'm often very like quiet when I come out of a conversation like that. And, I try as much as I can to sort of let that teach me.
Makes sense. Makes sense. Is there any advice that you would give to family members or loved ones, caregivers, about how to support someone with myeloma, as well as sort of your own role? You're a type of caregiver in a way, in a larger sense, and how can caregivers have resilience, empathy, and all the other attributes that help themselves and the patient together um, to sort of get through this journey in a more quality way.
I love that question. Yeah, because I think many caregivers can probably relate to that. Like, how can I help? I think as a culture, we like collective, like we don't have really good language for talking about cancer. It's like people sort of get this kind of walking on eggshells thing. So I think the thing I would probably share is most importantly, um, try to still be there, still be who you were before the cancer. Like, uh, so try to maintain some normalcy that way and get used to being comfortable talking about it if your friend or family member wants to. And they may not, necessarily want to. I think oftentimes people wonder, like, what can I do to help? Um, Having some ideas in mind, maybe to share with your friend or family member, can be a really good idea. And this is why. Oftentimes when we say like let me know if there's anything I can do to help. Then it's kind of on the patient, and they may not know what they need right away. Um, Whereas maybe if we offer something, and this, I kind of go into a conversation similarly about like sharing what my role is and some examples of things I could help with if the person's interested and they accept the service. Um, that gives the people an idea of when they might want to draw on your help and what your special thing is that you have to offer. So like if you make a really good casserole, you just say like, "Hey, can I drop off a casserole? Can I watch the kids while you get treatment? Do you want me to go to treatment with you?" And kind of like to start interviewing your friend in a way, like brainstorm together, help them maybe think of some ideas. Um, it can be hard to not give unsolicited advice. So that would be kind of my other gentle suggestion is that when people get a cancer diagnosis, it's often like sort of a bombardment of well-intentioned advice. If they have the gift of having many friends, right? And there can be kind of a parade of well-wishers. It's what I often call it. Um, and like often that I mean that can mean so much, even just like the intention. Um, and I will say that um, you know, one of the best practices with offering advice, because we may know something that we think could help someone. Um, hey, have you heard of this CAR T clinical trial they're doing? Do you want to check it out? Just maybe ask your friend's permission. Could I give you some advice? Just to see kind of what they're, and maybe if they don't want to go there, they have a chance to turn that down or talk about something else. And a lot of times I hear people, they just say they want to be treated the same way. And even that's not always universal. Some people want their friends to know their energy level might be a bit lower. They maybe can't do the same things. They can't go out to the bar and play darts on Thursday. Um, so everyone's different, but I think like a good general approach is like ask permission before giving advice and just being with them. Just showing up often is more than enough.
Showing up is 90% of life. Um,
Yeah, that's right.
but I like that with the specificity of offers and examples of how someone can help because a lot of times, we hear, how can I help? And it's a little bit boilerplate, even if it's not meant to be, it might resonate as such, right? Because everybody will say, how can I help? But again, as you said, it puts the burden on the patient to think about how they can help or do they really mean it? Or, on top of everything they're already having to deal with. So maybe more giving instead of asking a general question like that can be very helpful to the patient. I think you'd agree.
Yeah, absolutely.
Excellent. Excellent. So I think we got some great nuggets and gems from this podcast. I really appreciate Adam, you coming on and just showcasing the role of the social worker, and what Dana-Farber does specifically. How can folks get in touch with you and your work and Dana-Farber as an option?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's been such a pleasure to talk about this with you, and the feeling's mutual. Um, so Dana, it's funny. I use our website like every day, and I think it's dana-farber.org. But let me just double check. You can look me up on LinkedIn. Just search Adam Lang, social worker. I'm active on LinkedIn. And search our website at Dana-Farber. It is dana-farber.org. And that'll have a lot of really good information specific to multiple myeloma. If you look up our disease center, we also have a little page about social work and how to get a social worker. If you get your care somewhere else, if you haven't already, ask your primary oncologist if they have social work, or ask your primary care physician if their clinic has a social worker. And then that might be a way to sort of see what kind of resources are out there. If you want to do more kind of counseling or therapy, they could help you find someone.
Excellent. And with that, thank you everyone for listening. And Adam, much appreciated. And we'll be in touch.
Thank you for having me. Take
Thank you.
care.
Bye bye.